Hello, this is Eric Thompson. I am owner and founder of Peerless Wealth, a registered investment advisory firm located in Columbus, Ohio. As always, thank you for tuning in. So we're going to talk about individual stocks versus mutual funds. Stocks versus funds. What should you do, and why do I advise my clients one way or the other? We're going to kind of talk about the pros and cons and maybe show you some things you haven't seen before. In fact, we're going to talk about a couple quote-unquote pros. We're going to talk about Warren Buffett, and we're going to talk about Jim Kramer, the Mad Money commentator that you see on CNBC that's been on for a couple of decades now. So sometimes I get asked the question, hey, Eric, I was looking at my investment portfolio. Why don't we own shares of, Apple or Nvidia or whatever individual stock? And my response is, you do. They're buried inside, the index fund you own or the managed mutual fund you own. And then the question is, why shouldn't we just own the stocks directly as opposed to the fund? And I get it. The allure of individual stocks is extremely tempting and exciting. This year, Nvidia stock, which makes chips for artificial intelligence technology, is up 200 or 300%. If you bought Apple stock 15 years ago, you've made 5 to 10x your money. Jim Kramer just gave me this tip. My neighbor's uncle said this stock can't miss. And there's no shortage of good stories, good exciting stories out there, and it does get people excited. However, what's often not talked about is the individual stocks that don't work out. And because that's not as exciting, right? And by the way, I always encourage my clients to call me, and I've had this happen. They read an article or whatever, and I'll give you my honest opinion on it. But what I normally do is I don't advise individual stocks, and I'll give you some good reasons why. Before I do, I want to give you some historical perspective on some very solid companies that trade on the stock exchange that you could buy shares of as stocks. That maybe haven't worked out. And some people say, well, as long as I just buy blue chips and hold them, I'll be fine. Well, let me give you some names. General Electric stock. In fact, I'm going to pull them up on my phone because I don't have the charts in front of me. Oh, General Electric, right? Light bulbs, aircraft engines, can't miss, right? Well, in 10 years, as you can see from the chart that's going to pop up, it was $190 10 years ago. Now it's $115. AT&T. Happen to have a decent amount of clients that used to work at AT&T and retire from AT&T, and a lot of times own company stock in AT&T. And I remember when I first got started, the defense of owning what I thought to be too much in company stock was, and this was 15 years ago, 20 in some case, was, it's the phone company. Everyone's got to use their phone. Everyone pays their phone bill. Well, let's look at the share price over 10 years. It went from $30 a share to $20 a share over 10 years. And by the way, the last 10 years, the S&P 500 has more than doubled. What happened is people went to cell phones, and AT&T has cell service, but most of their business was landlines. And it's been a slow death over the last decade. Walgreens. There's a Walgreens on every corner. Every time I go in there for like 3 things, and I wind up spending like $65, right? They got to be making money hand over fist. Well, as you can see from the chart, 10 years ago, they were about $80 a share. Now they're about $21 a share. Disney, you would think is a pretty safe play. They're still lower than they were 10 years ago with a lot of volatility in between. IBM, pull up that one. Again, it was $190 10 years ago. Now it's $160. Now some of these names pay some dividend income, but it's not that much. Intel, right? Every PC, Intel inside. Okay, well, they were $35 a share 10 years ago. They're just barely over that right now. Ford. what used to be at least the first and largest auto company. They were $17 a share 10 years ago. Now they're $11 a share. So this is why I usually don't advise people buy individual stocks. And when people do, they often get emotionally attached to a name. And when it goes down, they don't want to admit a loss, so they don't sell it, and they just wait for it to hopefully come back. And sometimes it never does. But more importantly than that, individual stock investing successfully over time is hard. And you might think, well, if I do my research and I spend time and I watch them, that's my favorite, if I watch them, right? Well, you can't control what they're doing by watching them. It's incredibly hard. I'm going to prove how it's hard with two examples. The first one, and I'll admit, I enjoy watching Jim Kramer. I don't do it all the time, but he's very smart, and as I understand it, back in the 80s and 90s, he had a pretty good track record managing a private fund. But about 20 years ago, he started his Mad Money show, and he would give tips on individual stocks. And then the guy's bright. He would thoroughly analyze these companies, and every time he would recommend something, it would sound extremely good, like really good analysis and really good rationale. And so the Pennsylvania Wharton School of Business did a study on the stocks he recommended and how they would actually perform over time. And you'll see this chart show up on the screen. And the red line, and this goes back to 2001, and it's through 2015, 2016, so it's not incredibly up to date, but it's about a 15-year period of time. The Jim Kramer Action Alerts Plus portfolio, you can subscribe, by the way, to a newsletter that gives you these stock ideas, is the red line. The light blue line is the S&P 500, which is a very good way to invest, by the way. Just buy the S&P 500, the top 5 companies in the world, forget about it. And as you can see, the S&P 500 over that time went up about 120%, and Jim Kramer's, and that's with dividends reinvested, and Jim Kramer's portfolio went up about half that, about 60%. So even the brightest minds, it's very difficult over time to get an edge and do better than just simply buying a diversified basket of stocks and not trying to kind of be a hero and pick the winners. The second piece of data I'll point to, and I'm going to admit I like Warren Buffett. I enjoy his commentary, probably better than that of Jim Cramer's. He's a little less showboaty and he's a little more down to earth. He's often heralded as being one of the most successful stock pickers and investors over time. And in fact, during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, his performance was extremely good. But let's just look over the last 10 years. And what I did is I put his holding company, which is Berkshire Hathaway. You can invest right alongside Warren Buffett. In fact, one of the few individual stocks that I have no problem owning or have clients owning is Berkshire Hathaway. And I put that against, again, the S&P 500, just owning everything. And this is from Morningstar, which is a research software that I use. And if we look over 10 years, the average annual return of Berkshire Hathaway stock was 12.49% per year. Now, every year is, of course, dramatically different, but the average worked out to be 12.49%, which is great. The S&P 500 was 11.45. So in this case, Warren had an edge. But would you have thought that given Warren Buffett's skill, Charlie Munger, which has recently passed away, and all the hundreds of people, analysts that are from all the top and brightest schools that worked for Berkshire Hathaway that are analyzing these companies to death, they only outperformed the market index by 1% on average per year. So, and that's one of the best examples we have. So I'm not too proud to say that I'm probably not going to pick individual stocks as well. So I prefer owning baskets of stocks. Now that could be an S&P 500 index fund, a small cap index fund. It could be an actively managed fund from a third party. but I like to make sure on actively managed fund that their fees are very low, because that's an important part of mutual fund investing. We got to make sure their fees are low. So my advice is try not to get sort of caught in the allure of individual stocks, even though there's some great stories out there and great companies, at least not for the majority of your retirement. That's why I buy portfolios or baskets of either large company stocks like the S&P 500, small companies, real estate, non-US companies, dividend-paying companies. And I think the majority of the people, including some people that are calling themselves pros, are going to have better results with this and definitely less risk. Your retirement will be more predictable. So that's my philosophy on individual stocks versus mutual funds and ETFs. As always, I hope you learned something, and tune in next time. Thank you.